the maiden so gentle and kind, as sweet as a rose in the June. Each night as we wander, the moon seems to smile on me and my loved one.
The Donovan clan didn't spread out much in Inishowen. There are very few of them left. In fact, we could say the Donovan name, in fact, has died out. So we don't hear a lot about John Donovan from that point of view. The other thing is, as we'll see, there's a strong suspicion that John took his own life at the end. And as a result, people didn't like to talk about him, and they didn't talk to the family. So that a lot of the lore and all connected with John Donovan simply died away. And I suppose what we have left are the 6 recordings. And as Grace said, like a lot of the people of Inishowen would know these. A particular generation would know the John Donovan recordings. In fact, if you were around in the 50s and 60s when the RTE was running hospitals' requests, you would have often heard John Donovan records played during that time. It's called a presentation. I'm not sure what that is. I'm going to tell you a yarn. I'm not, first of all, when I came in here, Grace told me the people here are not musicians, they're singers. To be very careful the words I use. So I'm going to do my best to try, and I know I'm talking to singers. Unfortunately, if you know the Tolands, they're all great singers, but unfortunately I was behind the barn door when it was being given out. I can't sing at all. I've been warned not to try, so I'll go along with that. I suppose what I can do is, the talk is based a lot on slides of the photographs that were in the Donovan family. After Charlie, that's John's brother, died, and his wife Celia, going through the house, like a lot of families of that era, they were hoarders. They kept everything. And so going through the house, we found photographs taken in old Brownie box cameras of Inishtrahull back in 1900, and etc. And it was fantastic to get them. The other thing was, around Malin Head, when I did get interested in John Donovan, I started to ask people about him, and people came up with stories. If anybody wants to contradict me, please do. I'd be glad. I'm not giving you any kind of a strict historical presentation at all. I'm telling the story of John Donovan as I knew him through his family, and particularly through the slides here, and the people who did know him. This is John Donovan. This is the man we're talking about. He said he was 35 years of age when he died. Died at a very young age indeed. Fairly good-looking man. You can see why he was popular in the dance halls and the concert halls in Inishowen. Move on. Now, I heard a few strange accents from Derry and places and other places like that on the way in. So, just to let them know where they are, I wanted, this is Inishowen. The Malin Head area is where we're talking about. This is, a lot of the talk will be about Inishtrahull Island. Now, if anybody wants to hear about Inishtrahull Island, I'll stay here all night. That was my main interest when I started off. I found out a lot about Inishtrahull Island. I went out onto it. It's a fantastic place altogether. The fact that John Donovan was born there or reared there then made me interested in John Donovan. But I've told Grace like to try, and if after 3/4 of an hour I haven't got on to John Donovan, she's to let me know. This is a close-up of the island. I want to give you this because this is it's the west end of it and the east end, and the reason for that is on the island it was mainly a communication centre. If you look out at the island at the moment, you'll see on the west end there is a lighthouse. You can see that from a distance. But originally it didn't start off like that. The first lighthouse was put on the east end here, and the ruins of that are still visible. And as I'll be explaining through the talk then, they moved gradually towards the west of the island. On the island there were 13 families. It's been inhabited off and on. We know it was inhabited at around 1800. The first lighthouse was built in 1805, and then the island was finally deserted in 1929. although the Donovans moved off in 1926, and gradually the families just moved off the island bit by bit until about 1929 there was no one left in the island, except the light keepers, and now the island's automatic. The lighthouse has gone automatic. There is nobody left on it at all except the light keepers who come out every so often. Now, we'll start the story of John Donovan. It starts in Waterford, where the Donovan family came from. And this is their house. It was called Rose Cottage in Dunmore East in County Waterford. The family were a big seafaring family. Every second brother, cousin was a sea captain or had some connection with sea. Jack Donovan, now this is one of the difficulties as we go along. As you know, in most families at that time, there was one name and it was passed down through the generations. And so you have Jacks and Johns and Johns and Shawns and Jacks, and it is a bit confusing. But this is John Gabriel Donovan, John's father. He came from Dunmore East, County Waterford, born in 1885, moved as a signalsman to Inishtrahull. Now, a signalsman was somebody who watched the ships and recorded them and passed the messages on to the Lloyd's Shipping Company in London. The reason for this was basically that there was no when a ship left and crossed the Atlantic in those days, they had no way of knowing where it was. If the winds were favourable, it could be there in 4 weeks. If the winds weren't favourable, it could be 10 or 11 weeks. The first time they would know anything about a ship is when it would come in sight of land. The first place they would see it was off Inishtrahull Island. So the people in Inishtrahull would record the ship, pass the messages on to Lloyd's in London, because mainly in those days the ships carried what we call commodities nowadays, which meant the price went up and down, much like fishermen today watch out for the price of fish, so that knowing when a ship was coming in would affect the price of the commodity on the London market. Back to Inishtrahull. This is John's mother. She was Ellen Donald-Neil. She lived on the island, and her family go back on the island. We can trace it back another 2 generations. There's a famous document called Griffith's Evaluation in 1856, which lists the families on the island, and we know that a relation of hers was listed on at that time, Miss Lochry. She was slightly older than John, and in 1909 they got married in the Star of the Sea Church of Malin Head. This is just another little bit of history. Lloyd's bought the island off the natives, or the locals, and leased it back to them. And this is the deed from the house of John Donovan's mother. It doesn't show up very well on the screen, but we have the original lease. That's just a photograph. And it was signed in 1902, so that they were given the houses for 100 years, so the leases run out. And I remember, even after the people left the island, that they used to pay their shilling a year to Lloyd's to keep, which would give them rights to go back to the island anytime they wanted. This is a very old photograph of what life was like on the island. There is we're over now, that's the east end, and that's the lighthouse, if you can see it. The pier, Portmore, which is on the north side of the island. If you go out to it, you have to go around the island to come into it. There were, say, 13 families. Most of them lived actually on this side of the island. We'll see that in a minute. You can see what's going on here is they're shearing sheep. They lived like most islanders. They sheared sheep, they had kept sheep, they had cows. They grew potatoes and oats. The soil's particularly sandy out there, but they supplemented that by using seaweed. And one of the letters we have from John Donovan's father, he says, that he talks about coming home exhausted after carrying 56 creels of seaweed up onto the field to the center of the island. This is one of the old postcards. As you know, they took postcards in black and white and then they touched them up with color. And that is Portmore, the pier in Inishtrahull, with the lighthouse at the east end up at the top. You can see a couple of the old boats at the pier. Now, that's the pier itself, and one of the things you'll notice about that is the number of uniforms and hats on it. It wasn't just, this wasn't like the Blasket Islands or places like this where there are the Iron Islands. Inishtrahull was really a centre. Because it's hard for us to imagine nowadays what it would be like. But remember, first of all, you had the lighthouse keepers on the island and everything connected with them, the inspectors coming, the supply ships coming in, Irish Light supply ships coming in. And then you had Lloyd's at a signal station. They were completely separate. And the same thing again. So a lot of the islanders lived by working for Lloyd's or for the Lighthouse Company in different ways. The islanders would earn by, carrying stuff up, equipment, helping with the building and things like that. This is the old lighthouse still on the east end. And what's particularly, if you notice, if you can see it, is down in the corner here, there's a guy standing doing that, and he is semaphoring. And this was the method of communication used pre-1900. They sent the messages from the island to the tower in Malin Head. Now that's a distance of about 7 miles at least. And whoever's in Malin Head would look out with a telescope and he would be able to get the message and vice versa. And this is the original telescope that they used on Inishtrahull. Very simple. They put it on a stand and they would read the messages from going that went back and forth on the island. Lloyd's would send their messages to the tower, and then they would be telegraphed on to Belfast and then on to London during the course of the day. That is John Donovan in the front. That's his brother Charlie, and that's his father over at the lighthouse at the East End. If you ever get a chance to go out to the island, the ruins are still left. The top of the lighthouse is gone. They demolished it out here, although you'll find bits of glass and bits of the balcony still lying about because it's not frequented. Moving on then, on the other side of the island, the side you see now that most people see, this is the lighthouse, the lightkeeper's quarters that you can still see, and this is a photograph of people taken just outside it, early again, 1900s. Now, look, facing, if you're standing at Malin Head and looking straight out, that's the photograph you've just seen there. Those are the houses there about 1900. You had the lighthouse, and then Lloyd's built a foghorn, a fog station to warn the ships passing. And instead of building it over on the east end with the lighthouse, they built it over here. This is the lighthouse quarters. These are the two houses that belonged to the Lloyd's employees, and that is the Donovan household. That's where John Donovan. Now, wish I could say John Donovan was born there. He wasn't. What usually happened was the women in the island, that when they were pregnant, about a few weeks before the child was due, they moved into the mainland with relations, and the child was usually born. John Donovan was born up near the present radio station in Malin Head, in a house called Paddy Moore's of the gravel pit. And then they would have moved back almost immediately onto the island, and John was brought up there. This is the other Lloyd's house where the head lightkeeper lived. You can see they're fairly small, and one of the letters, the priest used to come out to the island once a month to say mass. And one of the letters we have, John, this is the father now we're talking about all the time at the minute, complained about having to give up his bed because the priest was coming. As I said, it was due here. And one other time, there was a new employee coming, and again, instead of being lodged with the head guy, it was stuck into Donovan's, and again, John was complaining, But as you know, institutions like this were run like the army in those days, and you just did what you're told, and he had no say in the matter. These are the Lloyd's employees. That little hut, which still remains on the island, is where they had their lookout. Very small, about the size of this side corner of the stage, and they went in there, and there's, you can see it now, the telescope, pair of binoculars, and these were the employees. They watched the ships, recorded them in a log, and again, I have the original log from Lloyd's. With all the ships listed. This takes up 2 years. Not even 2 years, up to here. Because this was the last log that was kept, and the Donovans held on to it after they went. So I presume a log like this would carry 4 years of all the ships that passed the island. And the other interesting thing about this as we go along, the reason it came is when the logbook was finished, of course, I mean, it wasn't sent back or anything, and young John Donovan got his hands on it, and it was the greatest thing, and he drew, like any kid would, all over it. I'm sorry, I don't know if you can see this, and it's the most fantastic record of a youngster's upbringing. We know John was creative, we know that from his singing and from his arrangement of his songs. But in that, there's a whole history of the 1920s and 30s. Because he could listen to the radio, and this is what I suppose the point why I think John Donovan, became such a popular entertainer. 1898, Marconi sent his first signals from Ballycastle to Rathlin Island and vice versa. That equipment then was moved to Inishtrahull 4 years later. And from then on, they communicated by radio between Inishtrahull and Malin Head, although they kept the semaphore because the radio sometimes wasn't all that reliable. We're talking about the very early days of radio. So they still kept the semaphore, but they had radio, and the Donovans could listen to radio. In the days when, now, I mean, we often talk about the days of radio where people used to go to the house, somebody had a radio, and they all listened to the match, and things like that. Now, the Donovans had their radio, and they had it all the time. Not just radio airing from 10 in the morning to 2 or whatever it is, but they could tune into radio all over the world on ships and everything else. And we'll come across a letter later where they're talking about that. And this is where John Donovan learned a lot of his, not just songs, but presentation of songs and different types of songs, why he became such a good entertainer. And as you'll see, one of the things, and you see later on, one of the people that sang with John, or played with John Donovan was Neil Toland. Neil died a couple of years ago at 92, released the CD when he was 90. But the great thing about Neil is when you went in, you would expect, he would play your reel or something first, on a button key accordion, sat down and played a reel, and you thought that was typical, that's great. And next he would launch into In the Mood. So because this is the type of tune that they had learned on the radio. And that is what made them so popular in Inishowen then as a dance band. Because, as you know, music had to be danced to in Inishowen at that time. I would refer you to Mick Denise, his article on Seamus Grant, where he talks a lot about music and how what it meant to the people of Inishowen. And Mick says, that music had to be dance music first and foremost. So not alone could John Donovan play the fiddle, as we see, but he had all this repertoire of pop music, I suppose, in his days. And that's one of the reasons why he became so popular over Inishowen. This is the boat that supplied the island. And that ran up until 1978. It actually ran from 1805 to 1978. And that's John Donovan in it again, going out. These are all Donovan photographs. That's why you find so many John Donovan mentioned. So that's the boat that would take people in and out to the island. Did 2 trips every day to the island. Right, Grace? Sorry? Yeah, okay, yeah. What we're going to do is, just to give you an idea of what the records are like, we're going to play a few of them at different intervals during the talk. So.
The nightingales are singing in the valley. The stars like shining jewels deck the sky. And still beside again is a linger and dream about a love that never dies. The summer soon will pass away, murmur, but when the fields are ripe with golden grain, then I'll come back to keep my loving promise, and you and I will never part again. When the harvest...
Now, we're back on the island again. This is looking towards the west end. That's where the buildings we saw, the Lloyd's buildings, the fog station, the lighthouse keepers. And the most interesting place, I want to tell you a little bit about the island now, and as I say, stop me after an hour, Grace. The most interesting place there is the school. The school was built in 1901, and a very modern school it was, you know. It was one of the few slated buildings on the island. The McGonagals, who ran the boat to the island, owned a house in the centre, and they had a slate roof, and the house was, the school also had a slate roof. The rest of them, of course, were all thatched. This is the last teacher on the island. He was called Master McCallion, and it sounds idyllic on the island, but I remember, again, from the letters that John and the Donovan family, life wasn't so good on the island. Number one, there was no mitching. You couldn't run away and hide any day. Number two, you had to do your homework, because the master used to go around every house at night to make sure you were doing it. So again, it wasn't, I suppose in that way, that it wasn't as free and easy as they thought. The other thing is the McGonagals, sorry, this is another one of the teachers, because I got this because she's related to people in Malin Head who taught on the island as well. I was saying the McGonagals were very helpful to the teacher on the island, because when the inspector came every so often, the only boat he could come out on was the McGonagals' boat, and they used to put a little flag up on the top on his way out so that they knew the inspector was on his way and everything was shipshape. If you ever go to Malin Head now, some of you may know there's a place called the Wee House of Malin, or the Well, and that area at the bottom of it. And now there's a statue there set up. That statue was taken from the school on Inishtrahull. And a lot of Irish schools, right up to the 50s and 60s, there was always these big statues of the Blessed Virgin set at various places. And there was one presented to the school in Inishtrahull that sat inside the door. It was there for years, then it disappeared, and about 10 years ago it was discovered under the stage in the hall in Malin Head. So they took it out, they've glassed it in now, and it's visible down at Malin Well at the minute. Now, apart from the idyllic side of the island, as I say, it was communications were the important thing on Inishtrahull. This is the tower at Malin Head when the wireless station was opened there. In 1902, the equipment from Rathlin was moved to Malin Head, and this is a picture of the opening. That bit, you know, is still there today. Bits of the other buildings are still around. And that, when the information then was sent into the tower by radio, it could be telegraphed on then to say Belfast, London, etc. That closed down about 1908, I think, and it was moved down to near the post office. I'm not, fellow called Finbar O'Connor in Malin Head is researching a lot of this. And if you're interested in the whole history of radio, you can just, if you Google Malin Head radio station, you get a lot of information about the times and all the rest. Why it's important for us is that John Donovan was at the centre of this and had a lot of stuff available to him that the normal singer or musician in Inishowen didn't have. This is a letter written by Charlie, his brother, and it gives you a flavour of what life was like on the island. The Hull, that's what they called it, Inishtrahull, Saturday, the 16th of the 5th, 1925. Dear Mama and John, John is our singer. Just a line to let you know I'm getting on fine here. I stay with Blakely and Ryan until midnight and then come in and go to bed. Tell John to keep at his catechism. We got America on the wireless on Thursday night. That's an idea. America on the wireless in 1925. And remember, the BBC only opened in 1922 with very restricted service. A place in France and one in Spain. The chickens are very big now, but I think there are a lot of roosters for their very long tails. Try and come out on Tuesday if you can, for it is very lonely here without you. Now I will close as the boat is going with love and kisses from your loving son, Charles. P.S. I got your parcel all right and was very glad of the same. Give Biddy the tobacco, no trawlers around since you went in. And that gives you a great flavour of what life was like on the island, you know, just day to day. But, you know, it reminds me a wee bit of the Patrick Kavanagh poem, you know, barges going to Athy and other far-flung places, you know, and it's an island like Inishtrahull that they were in touch with everything that was going on in the world. Just to mention, too, the Mrs. A lot of, yeah?
Well, just ask, it seems that the letter was in English.
Yeah?
Was Inishtrahull?
No, there's no, a lot of the place names and all are in Irish, but there's no record of.
Did they speak Irish or was it?
No, it was English. It was, there's no record of it. A lot of the places in Inishtrahull, one of the things you have to remember that didn't come into that map is Islay is only about 50 miles away. And there was a lot of communication to, you see, we tend to forget that the main highways in those days were the seaways. So that they were very much in touch with the people of Islay. When they were out fishing, they would bump into fishermen from Islay, from Rathlin, from the north of Ireland. So and it's the same, you find a lot of similarities between that and Rathlin Island, if you ever go on to it, you know, the whole communication thing, the fishing, the Scottish connection. And again, as Seamus Grant, or Mick Denise mentioned in the article, that's why you have such a big Scottish influence here. And one of John's songs, The Rose of Moray, is originally a Scottish song. So even though a lot of the places are Irish or Scots Gaelic names, they spoke, I suppose you see you had a big English influence on the island, and that's why they spoke English all the time. We're back, this is the semaphore equipment, the guy with the flags. This is Charlie, John's brother, with the telescope. They had a tele lamp to light it up because they had to see it. They usually did it against a whitewashed wall in the tele lamp, and I think this guy's just making up the photograph. Right. There was a graveyard on the island. That's the east end again. That's the bit furthest away from us. But very few islanders were buried there. They were always taken ashore and buried either in lag or a high clay. The graves here mainly belong to lighthouse keepers and Lloyd's men, because what happened is if somebody died, I mean, you could take the case of the Donovans. We have no record of anybody in the Donovan family dying, but they would never take the body onto the mainland and all the way down to Waterford or wherever the lighthouse keepers came. So a lot of the people connected with Lloyd's and the light keepers were buried here, and some of the graves, you can still make out some of the headstones. Now, we'll get on to John Donovan. Are we okay, Grace? Right. This is a photograph taken on the school wall in Inishtrahull with his fiddle. And he learned to play the fiddle from a very early age. In fact, my wife says she remembers that in the house, at one stage, there was a fiddle made out of a biscuit box. His father had taken and made a fiddle out of a biscuit box where John started, and that's where he started his fiddling career. He loved fiddling more than singing, and he was a fiddler more than anything else, and if he'd given his choice, he would rather play the fiddle. He used the fiddle to accompany himself by plucking along as he went along. You will see later on a photograph of him on a mandolin. It's just a prop. I think as a day, when he went to get his photograph taken, they hadn't got a fiddle, so they said, take this, it's musical, and you'll do grand on it. Now, this is, again, the Donovan family. John's father, mother, and Charlie, his brother. This is a cousin. Now, I just want to mention them because I know there are people from nearer than Derry here tonight who may be familiar with some of these people. In 1928, John Donovan's uncle, who was a fisherman, was drowned out on the Bellanova bank near Inishtrahull, and the family was destitute. So they got together and they formed a relief committee to raise money, and they bought them a farm over in Culdaff at a place called Dunross. And the family, that's John's uncle's family, they moved to Dunross, and they were known there as the Widows. And there's families around there are known as the Widow family. And there's still quite a few of their relations about here today. But that was one of them, Mary or Mamie, they called her. The Donovan family, they lived on Inishtrahull. And I think again, this is only conjecture on my part, but Lloyd's started to phase out the signal station there, because with radio now, they could radio London. The boats could get in contact at any time. There was no more need for a signal station on it. I think, if we go according to the ledger, they closed down in about 1920. I know from one of the letters that the Donovans wrote again to one of their relations in America, they were thinking of emigrating to the States in 1923. The letters dated 1923, and they were talking of emigration. But they stayed on in the island. I presume he had some kind of a pension which kept him there. But they decided to move to Malin Head, and this is the pier at Malin Head. But it's to give you an idea of the boats. If you move on one grace, I think, yeah. Now, these are the boats they used to cross Inishtrahull Sound, which is one of the most dangerous sea passages you can have because of the tides, the winds, and everything else. And these boats were rowed or sailed. And quite often in a storm, they were swept off course. There's one story of an Inishtrahull man coming home to his own wake. And the story behind it is he was out, he was swept, the wind carried him, the prevailing winds are southwest, carried him over to Islay. At home, he was presumed dead. They presumed to have a wake. In the meantime, he arrived back and came in the door and told who was dead, and they told them, well, it's you, actually. So it was a precarious existence. So a lot of drownings around Malin Head. We know even up to the present day that a lot of people have been drowned, fishermen have been drowned around Malin Head, because it is a fairly treacherous place. So, now, when they moved into the mainland in 1926, John's father had been suffering badly from depression, and he was removed to St. Connell's Hospital. And so the family then that was left was simply Charlie and John and the mother. And this gives a wee bit of insight into the character of John later on. Charlie, immediately, as soon as he moved to the island, wanted to be a radio operator. His father had taught him Morse and everything else out on the island. So he went to Kevin Street in Dublin, where there was an 18-month course. Charlie completed it in 6 months and was straight off to sea. He knew it all. He knew how to operate Morse. He knew everything that needed to do. So after 6 months, he went off to sea. And for the rest of his life, John lived with his mother in Malin Head. So from 1926, Charlie has disappeared off the scene altogether, and John and the mother moved into Carndonagh first, then back out to Malin Head and lived in one of the houses there in the Coast Guard station. You'll know it's above the pier. What did he do? I'll explain that. He was a fisherman, mainly, John. He fished with the McGonagals. That's the people who ran that boat to the island. And that's what he spent most of his life at. We tend to think of him as a singer, but John was a fisherman, loved the sea, and that's what his life was made up of. In 1922, Dave Valera won a famous victory in Irish politics. I'm not well up in it, but I'm told it was. The local parish priest was obviously a fan, because he's... 32, sorry. 32. The local parish priest was obviously a big fan of Dev's, because he started a band, and he called the band the Victory Band, and he formed it, and this is John Donovan at the back. Now, again, as you can see from that, it's difficult to make out who the various people were. There was Michael and James Doherty were on the band with him, and Neil Toland was the other. They were the core of the band. The Michael Doherty was normally known as the Sprigger. That's the nickname. Of course, in Malin Head, they're nothing but Doherty's McLaughlin, so you have to have a nickname to find out to know who you are. So the original band, they called the Victory Band, was the two, James and Michael and John and Neil Toland. Some other people joined the band at different times. Some of them, I don't know, maybe because they were friends of the band, but I know on some occasions I heard people said, no, so-and-so joined, but he was no good, so they got rid of him, But that's the original band. They then became the Seaside Serenaders. The Victory Band moved on. And you have to understand at the time then, we're talking now about the time when how John, if you like, developed as a musician, as a singer and everything else.
So you're gone. let me know. Spoke those words and then she said goodbye. She'd sick me so.
When John moved to the mainland, got involved in the band, and it went from strength to strength. Now, again, you have to remember the circumstances, the social conditions at those times. People didn't travel, of course, to dances because, I mean, the only way you could get there was by bicycle if you had one. So people didn't travel very far, so there were halls all over Inishowen. Starting at the top, there was the parochial hall in Malin Head. There was then there was the AOH hall, which on the Black Mountain between Malin Head and Malin Town. Down to Malin Town, you had the Malin Town Hall. Rashini, Cairn had 3 halls. Kildare, Bocken, all these little sheds that are around called halls, because they had to cater for the local population. John, at the beginning, I suppose, played a lot in Malin Head. The other thing to remember, the church had a very big influence at the time in the halls. And a lot of the parochial halls were actually set up in competition against, if you like, the more lax lay halls, the private halls. There was a lot of carry-on going on in those halls that the parish priest didn't like, and they had no control over it, so they built their own halls and to keep an eye on things. People will remember those are the days when, during the dances, when the parish priest used to walk around the crowd, keeping an eye on everybody, and there's even talk of parish priests that had rulers, you know, that held them measured to make sure the couples weren't getting too close and doing anything they shouldn't do. My father tells me he used to go to the dances in Clonmany, and he said that the parish priest there didn't like strangers, so if you came from Cairn or places like that, you weren't welcome, because God knows what Cairn people could get up to, a lot with the innocent of people in Clonmany. So we had a lot of stuff like that going on. The dance halls in those days now, I mean, they were rude and primitive. They would have a wooden floor for the dancing, all right. The only seating would be a few forms or stools, and these were for the women. The men had a stand. There were no toilets, there were no cloakrooms, there was no canteen facilities, nothing like that at all. It was basically for dancing. Dances usually lasted from 9 to 2. Sunday night was dance night, and you had a couple of big dances during the year. I remember Neil Toland telling me the big one was the nurses' dance, because God, if you got a nurse in those days, you were set up for life. There were no relief bands or anything like that, although they used to have interval acts. You know, somebody come and do a step dance or something like that. And I know that in some of the halls, because we had the army both in Dunree and Leanan, that the army would often come in, and in the middle of it, they would have an interval, and they would do a marching display in the middle of the hall, you know, as to break up the program a bit. So, the other thing John was very interested in was football. That's him there. He was the goalkeeper for the Sea Rovers, and these are the league champions of 1934. These are, unfortunately, the last time I looked these up, there was one of these people left alive, and now that was maybe 8-9 years ago. I fear that maybe he's gone as well. But that was the Sea Rovers team. This is a photograph taken on the pier at Malin Head. Sorry, that's Mrs. Donovan. That's Charlie. See Charlie in the nice suit. He's back, of course, from being at sea and looking fairly dapper. This is another man from the island, Artie O'Connor, who was around Malin Head a long time. That's John. This is the Mimi we saw earlier on, the girl that moved to Dunross. And again, I'm not sure who the other character in the photograph is. At the height of his fame, John decided, or I don't know who decided, to take him to Dublin to record. And these are the recordings we have. He went into Butler's studio, photographic studio in Cairn to have his photograph taken. Stephen Butler did that. I say he handed him a mandolin because he'd forgotten his fiddle. In fact, he even borrowed the jumper. He wanted to say, been very publicity conscious. He felt, no, this is a fisherman. So, but John was wearing a shirt and tie, and that doesn't look too good. So we went out, and I actually, you know, P.G. McLaughlin used to work in ICR. The jumper belonged to his grandfather. He went out and he asked him, could he take the jumper for the photograph? And that's what he did. The other thing is, I have to say about this, is when I got this and got it copied, I got it back to front. John is not left-handed. So it's the other way. It's not his jumper, and he doesn't play the mandolin. So he went to Dublin in 1946 to do a recording. Now I heard of stars, taking a year to make an album and everything else nowadays, and all goes into it. They went to Dublin. John got a few drinks to settle his nerves. They had one microphone. The 6 songs were recorded within half an hour. End of story. On the bus and go wherever and go home. The accompanist on that occasion was a man called Albert Healy. Now, there's enough grey hairs among the audience to know, but the people may remember, he was accompanied a lot of singers on the old programs. If you remember programs like The School Around the Corner and all of that, if somebody was singing, somebody would accompany. Albert Healy played that role a lot with RT. Later on, he went on to become director of the Jury's Cabaret in Dublin. But he started off his career as accompanying singers, and it's his guitar that you hear on that. Now, I don't know a lot about these records. I think Nicholas Carlin's here in the audience, is he? And he knows more about this than me. So I'm going. If he's there, I wonder, could he say, just fill us in on Columbia Records and what that meant and all?
Sorry, this is totally unscheduled, as of 5 minutes ago. Electrical and musical industries was set up in Britain in 1931 as an amalgamation of a number of companies, including Columbia, which originally was an American company, still was and is, in fact. And there was no Irish recording industry until about 1935, about 10 years before these were made, 35, 36. Irish artists were going over to London to be recorded. That was the regular thing. John McCormick and people like that did that. But also British companies sent over portable recording setups, studios indeed, and cut discs in Ireland, but then brought the masters back and manufactured them in London usually, but in other cities as well. Sean Lemass, when he was Minister for Finance in the mid-30s, which was, the Depression era, slapped a tariff on imported 78s. And the result was it was cheaper for EMI and companies like that, Decca as well, to actually come and manufacture in Ireland. So they set up recording studios in Dame Street, in Jury's Hotel, the old Jury's Hotel in Dame Street, and they would record in the function room, ballroom there, and they manufactured them in Waterford. They set up a manufacturing factory in Waterford, and that was the beginning of the Irish record industry as a full process recording and manufacturing. So this is about 10 years into that process. And these are what are called matrix cards. Every recording had a unique number that was called a matrix number, and then a matrix card was drawn up, handwritten for the most part, but this was a printed card and the details were filled in. And you can see from this that the matrix number on the top middle box there, it's a CAL 280-3, which means he had 3 goes at making this particular recording. It's the third take of a particular thing. If I could just move in here, the recording date was the 7th of February 1945, isn't it? Yeah. And then it goes through various stages. There's a date of cataloguing and a date of test report and so on down at the bottom. And then finally, the recording, the stamper, the metal stamper, was destroyed in 1966. It was taken that there was no further commercial worth to the thing, and it was destroyed. So any recordings of him that survive are original recordings. I photocopied these in Hayes in Middlesex, which is the headquarters of EMI, in 1982, not knowing who John Donovan was at that time or any of the rest, but I simply copied all of the matrix cards for the Irish recordings. This is about 7 years after the famous Steely Murphy began recording. So a lot of big names that became famous on radio first and then made records. So this is towards the end of that process post-war. I think that's about all I have to say.
Thank you. So John Donovan recorded 6 songs. They came out in the old 78s. The 6 songs were the Harvest Moon, As Years Roll By, Tramp's Mother, You're as Welcome as the Flowers of May, My Lovely Irish Rose, and The Rose of Moray. A lot of people think that John Donovan composed these. I don't think he did. Again, I suppose it's local pride. You know, this is a John Donovan song, and before you knew, John Donovan had written it and everything else. But what was great about John Donovan, it was his ability to arrange songs. He used to, in those days, he used to get people coming around who sold you what were called penny sheets. For a penny, you bought a song, the words and the music of a song. And this would be one of the sources. The other one was that John used to go in regularly into Derry. There were 2 big shops in Derry, and John would go in regularly in there to buy music. He would come back, he'd arrange it for the band, and then they would play that at their next session. The music, again, on your website, there's a lot of stuff about this, you know, about the different kinds of songs and everything else. Just a little thing about it. The music of that say had to be dance music, and dancing was the big thing. You'll even hear, even in those old crackly records, they're done to waltz time or whatever it is. And dancers were the pop stars of their day locally. My mother-in-law used to talk often about dancing. She was mad on dancing. And she used to talk about the people in the hall. You would say, no, you would often ask her, no, were there any good men about you? Oh, there was a great dancer. Now, I know there's a kind of a story nowadays about a connection between the size of men's feet and their physical prowess or something. But in those days, according to my mother-in-law, small, neat feet. That's what you needed. Small. If you had small, neat feet, that made you a dancer. And she used to talk about, a guy who could dance you into a corner and on 2 moves get you back out and maneuver you through the rest of the crowd. Dancers were the thing. I just have to tell you, I remember asking my father about this. He said when he met my mother, and I said, did you dance? He said, yes. And I said, what was it like? And he says, it was like trying to drive a lorry. And then, as a kind of an addition to that, and he says, and in those days, there was no power steering. So dancing was a big thing. So that's a lot of the music of that had to be dance music. And that's why I say, like, people like Neil Toland, like things like In the Mood and American jazz and stuff like that was very popular. So that they had a great mix of traditional Irish music for ceilidh dancing. They had waltzes, foxtrots, all of that stuff. And that is why in those days people, really knew how to dance, or they said they did anyway. Right. John, 1940, John's brother Charlie was married, I think, 1943, wasn't it? Yeah, he was married in 43. John's father died in 1945. His mother died in 1947, I think, and John was left on his own. Now, the reason, if you go back to that photograph, John's life was John and his mother. John is a very sentimental man, and was very close to his mother. It's even said, like, when he was going out to his dances, that she used to do his hair. And what she did was, and I'm told, I'm not sure, but somebody said in those days the women used to make a mixture of sugar and rub it in their hair to set it. Yeah. John's mother used Carrigan moss. Because John had a mop of hair, as you can see, and she used to put Carrigan moss on it and comb it to keep it in place for the night. But he was very close to his mother. When Charlie got married and had his family, the mother died, the father died. John was left really on his own, and I suppose what happened then was he got TB, which in those days was a killer disease. Talking to people again, people used to say, like, if there was TB in the house, you were encouraged not to go into it. I remember somebody telling me, no, as children, they were told, you don't go down and play in the Doherty's house, and they say, why? But you weren't told, but it's because somebody in the house had contracted the TB and they didn't want to pass it on. So John, he went to Peamount in Dublin and then back to the hospital in Cairn. And I suppose at that stage depression set in. He had a lot of visits from people in Cairn and all the rest. But the story is that on a particular day, they went to get him find him after lunch. It seemed he had climbed down the drain pipe of the hospital and he was found in the river in 2 foot of water drowned. Now, the verdict was misadventure because in those days they didn't pass verdicts of suicide. But again, on the other hand, saying that, we just don't know. You could understand why at that particular point in his life that he would think of that. This is the story, and this is the Derry Journal of the with the story of well-known Inishowen singer's sad death. You see, there's Austin's, if you know it, in Derry, was still on the go advertising away back then. Just to kind of finish up, there's one bit in it I want the coroner I can't read it from there. They said, one of the things they said about John Donovan was he gave so freely of his time. John, I don't know what the financial considerations were for bands at those times, but John was always in demand at different places. At big nights, as they used to call them, John Donovan would be called along. And he was a very generous man in that way, that he didn't play the star, even though he knew he was a star. He was a pop star of his time. So in 1949, on the 28th of April, he died. This is his memoriam card. He's buried over in Lag Chapel. Graveyard, you see it just if you go into Lag, the doors on your left, John Donovan's grave is just above you, about 20 yards along, just above the church. And that is basically the story of John Donovan. As I say, the only members of the family that are still alive today, as I say, are my wife, who's his niece, and her brother Jack, who still lives in Malin Head. Apart from that, as I say, the only real memories people have are of the 6 songs that he recorded. And just to show you that these songs are recorded today, Grace told me that there's a member of the singing group that actually sang one of these one night. So is it Kate Crossan? Where is she? Is she here? Yes, right. Kate's going to sing probably his well-known song, My Lovely Irish Rose. Okay, have you mind? What? Oh, the Rose of Moray, sorry. She's not going to sing that one. Maybe she'll sing it right.
My daddy was Benny Crossan from Quigley's Point, and I learned the first songs that I learned when I was wee were Donovan songs. I always thought Donovan wrote them. The first song I learned was My Lovely Irish Rose when I was about 7, and then following that, I think it was the Rose of Moray, and then I think after that it was the Men Behind the Wire. But that's another story. My daddy had a back injury, and so I was sent down. Back then they were, you just lay. You weren't allowed to, move. So he was in the back bedroom, and I was supposed to keep him amused, and to keep me out of my mother's way. I would have gone down then, and Daddy would have sung to me, So I always loved him singing the Rose of Moray because it was a real tearjerker of a song. And he'd get to about the second verse, and I'd start to cry, and he'd say, "Sure, what are you crying for? We've not even got to the sad bit yet." And I'd say, but I know what's coming. So here it is, the wee sad song, The Rose of Moray. I once loved a maiden so gentle and kind, as sweet as the roses in June. Each night as we wandered, the moon seemed to smile on me and my darling so true. But though proud was I, as folks passed me by, I'd gaze on my flower of the dale, and so for her beauty, her sweetness and kind, I called her the Rose of Moray. I called her the Rose of Moray. But soon came the day when I wandered away from my sweet flower, my Rose of the dale. For someone had told me her love was untrue, that she loved another as well. She vowed she'd been faithful and pleasing to me, but jealousy then held its way. So I kissed her goodbye with a tear in my eye, and I lost the Rose of Moray. And I lost the Rose of Moray. Many years then went by till I found 'twas a lie. My loved one had always been true. My heart for her yearned, so again I returned and planned a sweet dream for us two. Once more home again I searched, but in vain. My sweet flower had faded away. There's a little green grave where the sad lilies wave, and there sleeps the Rose of Moray. And there sleeps the Rose of Moray. So now you have learned why no more I'll return again to the scenes of my love. And wherever I roam through this wild world alone, I'll pray to my Master above, that he may forgive and still let me live to repent as I go on my way. And although we're apart, she still lives in my heart. I still love the Rose of Moray. I still love the Rose of Moray.
Right, hello. Well, I was told there we have to get the show on the road here now, so that's a wee bit past our starting time, but we're not too bad. We're not too bad. Well, you're all very welcome here to the 25th, huh? Yeah. Even this row of seats up here, this should have done away with this row of seats. No, you're all very welcome to the 25th Inishowen Singing Seminar. And where's Jimmy? Is he? Where is he? Oh, there he is. I don't think he realised it was going to go on this long when we started back in '88. And I think there might be even a couple of people here who's at the first one. Further, yeah. So you're all very... Oh, Jerry too, yes. You weren't about then, were you? Right, I'm just going to go through the programme, what's happening, and... Do you know? I don't need this thing at all. But it's much the same programme. The only thing that's different, last year on the Friday night we had the session over here in the corner, and we're going to try and change that again. We're going to have it out in the bar this year. So we'll see how that works. We thought it was a bit wide open over there and it was too much spread out. And so we'll try it in the bar and we'll see how that goes. And it's Grace and her brother Colum's going to be doing the calling for that. So, and tomorrow then, well, after me now, Jim here, Grace's brother, Jim's going to do a talk on John Donovan. And that's going to take place in about 4 minutes' time. And I'm finished. So Jim's getting very nervous looking down there. And tomorrow, well, they're launching the Usher family. We're Donald McGuire and Pat and Stuart Carlin's doing the launch of the CD. So that's happening at 12 o'clock tomorrow, isn't it? I think this is all up behind me here. And instead of the Market House for our session tomorrow, we're going back to McPhilly's again, back to the Royal Hunt, so we think it's. And then back here for the concert, and the dinner will take place up here in the back. These round tables will all have a dinner, and just move down here then for the concert, so everything should be. And the Sunday is the same program up to the North Pole at 3 o'clock, and back here then for the Sunday night. But we're not having the quiz this year, so we're going to have a bit of tunes and songs. That's what we're having on the Sunday night out here in the bar as well. So we're going to have a few tunes and songs and mix it up a bit, you know. And then on the Monday, it's the Rusty Nail. Anybody that's left standing for the Rusty Nail? The diehards. But I just want to thank a few people. This festival wouldn't take place without their help. The Arts Council sponsors us, and the Golding Club in Dublin sponsors us every year, and Fáilte Ireland, and the Donegal County Council. And those are our main sponsors, and along with our people that sign up, the signing up for the registration, we're really counting on that this year. So if everybody, the more people registers, the better, and pays for our buses and our meals and all, and keeps the show on the road, you know. And we have these three here on this side, the Glen House and Glen Owen and Cycle Inishowen. If you go along with your badge from this seminar, they'll give you a discount or half price, I think. So if you want to cycle out over Marmore Gap tomorrow morning, take your badge with you and away you go. But as long as you're back for the launch of the Donald McGuire CD, that's the main thing. You know? And I think that's about, that's everything covered. And I hope you all have a good weekend. I know to look around me here, there's a good crowd here, and we will have a good weekend. And it's the crowd that comes here makes the weekend. It's not really, we just do the paperwork and move yous about here and there. So I'm gonna, well, you have to do that too. So I'm going to hand you over now. Oh, yeah, I'm just being instructed to tell everybody to turn off their phone. I don't know where mine's is. But I think Grace is going to introduce Jim. And I'm going to hand you over to Grace now. But I'll see you over the weekend anyway, and I'll be about him. Best. Good luck.
Not that there's any nepotism going on here in this weekend. So if anybody thinks the McGonagals or the Tolands are kind of taking over things, we're not. But tonight, my brother Jim is going to talk about a man called John Donovan from Inishtrahull Island who moved on to and moved in to Malin Head. And John's niece Anne is here tonight, and he's married to my brother Jim. So that's the whole reason that the thing is happening. For a whole generation of people in the 40s, John Donovan's name throughout Inishowen was really well known as a singer. And kind of as time went on, he only made 6 recordings. 78 said he went to Dublin to record. And those 6 songs have been really influential in Inishowen, and they were heard, and there's a whole generation of people who sing them and knew them, and they aren't sung that much anymore. But we're going to have a few people. There is going to be somebody tonight who is going to sing one of John's songs. After the weekend, we're going to make the songs available on the Inishowen Song Project and the story of John Donovan, so that somebody who was so influential, died, relatively young, that we're going to pull him back into the tradition. And I really hope, and especially the bursary singers, that some of them will learn some of the John Donovan songs. So next year, I really hope we're going to have a couple of John Donovan songs in the audience. So anyway, here is my big brother, Jim.